Hello friends, my name is Real Emile. Now you may remember a couple of weeks ago we did a series where we put cars around the Top Gear test track here in Forza Motorsport 5 and we recorded lap times and put them on our board. Now there was a couple of things in that series I wanted to adjust, so I figured instead of, going through all of the difficulties with re-recording certain laps and removing some of the Forza 4 laps which would make all the other videos sort of inconsistent with each other, I figured we'd just give this series a brand new reboot. We've reset all the times on the board is now free, and we're going to be throwing 7 cars around the track today. And today's theme is cars that were made between 2000 and 2005, because of course Top Gear started in 2002. So we're going to be recording the cars that came out around the start of Top Gear, and then next week we'll do from 2005 to 2010, and then from there 2011 to 2015. And then we'll do, many themes. You guys can suggest themes in the comment section if you like. If you want to tell me what you'd like to see get thrown around the track, we can certainly do that. But anyway, friends, let's get into the first lap. And it's going to be with this Skyline R34. Now, I figured a lot of people would want to see the Nissan Skyline go around the track. And to be fair, I was kind of curious to see how this car would do. Now, the actual original R34 Skyline came out in 1999. And this is the best model, I believe, 2002 Spec V. This was actually a very good car to drive. I'm super surprised about that. I wasn't quite sure on how the R34 would have driven. I was assuming there would be some oversteer, but this car was, other than some hints of understeer every now and again, this car was pretty much spot on. Power wise, we have 327 horsepower, so we've got a decent amount of horsepower in this car. It's actually a bit more down as expected. Round the hammerhead, it was understeer. Yeah, most four-wheel drive cars do that around the hammerhead. It is not too big a deal. We have 293 pounds-feet of torque, and the car actually weighs 3,439 pounds. So it's not ridiculously heavy. It was a bit more heavy than I was expecting it to be, but it wasn't too bad. Speed wise, it was also pretty good. It was hitting about 120, 130 down here, which is what most cars do. Round the second to last corner, it was pretty smooth, and around the Gambon, we do get some oversteer. Oh, understeer, sorry. Next car is the BMW Z8. Now, a lot of people are very hit or miss on this car. Me personally, I actually really like it. However, it's also a very unique car. However, it does have some unique issues. Now, the interior layout of this car is actually really weird. Usually what I do is I actually use the rev limiter in the car to decide whether to change up. Of course, there's also sound, because I don't usually have time to look at the bottom right corner of the screen. However, in this car, the rev counter is in the middle. It's also an odd angle, so you can't see it particularly well. The car also has a very weird tinted window screen, which you can't see out of very well. I race in cockpit view. All these laps will be done in cockpit view. So it's a little bit weird to get used to. Other than that though, this car is pretty much spot on. It has 394 horsepower, 369 pounds-feet of torque, and actually weighs just a little bit more than the Skyline did. I believe this has the same engine as the BMW M5 of this similar time period. Yeah, the Z8 was actually a very nice car to drive, and I do like the Z8. Second to last corner, I think I did have some issues with this one just going into it a bit fast. Obviously, these cars are a little bit older now, so the brakes aren't quite as good as their modern counterparts, but yeah, altogether a good car. Next up, we have the 2004 Honda Civic Type R. I'm not actually sure what this generation is called. All I could find on the internet is the EP3, but I'm not quite sure if that is the actual generation thing, so if you could tell me down in the comments, that'd be greatly appreciated. This car wasn't very nice to drive, I've got to be honest. The 1997 Civic I laud as a fantastic car, and I think you should all go and drive it immediately. This one though was fairly understeery, which is something you don't really get in the 97 Civic. But don't get me wrong, this car is huge amount of fun. You know, all hot hatches in this game usually are huge amounts of fun. But the understeer does ruin it a bit on this one. You know, which isn't really what I was expecting from this Civic. So anyway, power-wise, 212 horsepower, 149 pounds-feet of torque, and it weighs 2,600 pounds. So about average, what you'd expect for a hot hatch of this time period. But yeah, I was a bit disappointed with the Civic, but it still was a fairly decent car to drive. I believe it only is ridiculously cheap as well. I think this thing's like 14,000 credits, maybe? Yes, the car's fairly cheap, so I was having understeer troubles through all with all these cars around that corner, it seems. Next up, we have the Renault Clio, but this one has a V6 engine mounted in the middle. I love the Clio V6. It's such a mental little thing. It's fantastic. Now, this car isn't nice to drive. It's fun, don't get me wrong, this car is a huge amount of fun, but it does have some issues. It definitely takes a couple of laps to get used to the way this car drives. It has oversteer, it has understeer. It can flick when it wants to, and it will understeer when it wants to. It's a very odd car to drive this. Like I said, it will take you a while to get used to it, but once you do, you can appreciate it for what it is. It is fun. It can actually be a bit of a drift machine once you get used to it. But it is just getting used to it, that's the problem. 251 horsepower, 221 pounds-feet of torque, 3,086 pounds. I just thought, does this car have the same engine that would be in the V6 Renault Laguna of the time? It might do. I might have to look into it. I believe this was fettled by someone though, wasn't it? Was it TWD or someone did some modification to this? I don't know. Anyway, second to last corner in this car was a complete and utter nightmare. This, yeah, like I said, and around here we get some oversteer. It's rather amusing to see a Clio have oversteer. Next up, we have the hypercar of our, what's the word? Car list today. I don't know, English failed there. We have the Ferrari Enzo. Now this was one of the quickest cars around the actual real Top Gear track for a long time, I believe. It has 650 horsepower, 484 pounds-feet of torque, 3,086 pounds. It weighs exactly the same as that V6 Clio you just saw, but with 399 more horsepower. Yeah, this car was insanely quick. The Enzo really did surprise me. This thing drives pretty well. I've always hailed the Maserati MC12 as my favourite A-Class car, and essentially the MC12 is just an Enzo underneath. Admittedly, this doesn't handle quite as well as the MC12, but it does have a bit more speed than it. And this car is ludicrously fast. It's down here, it was getting about 160. This thing was monstrous. I actually had some real fun driving it. I'm not a huge fan of the Ferrari Enzo, but I do have to say, after my experiences with it here, my thoughts on it have greatly improved. Next up, we have the Ford GT. Now, this actually went round our old lap leaderboard, and I found that it wasn't the greatest car in the world to drive, and yeah, I still have those feelings. It just feels heavy. That's what the big problem with this car is. Of course, obviously, it is quite heavy. It weighs 3,390 pounds. Actually, that's not quite as heavy as I was expecting it to be. That's just a bit less than the R34 was. It has 550 horsepower and 500 pounds-feet of torque. But the car just does not handle very well. Jeremy Clarkson did remark when he actually test drove this. He actually ended up buying one. He did say the handling was nowhere near as precise as the Ferrari of the day, so that would be the F430. The brakes are also meh, is the best I can say on them, and the handling is much of the same. It is a fairly controllable car, but it just isn't a nice one to drive. It is fairly cheap for this sort of car though, 150,000 credits you'll pay for a Ford GT, which is pretty good. I'd probably have an ACR Viper over it, but That's still fairly decent, and across the line, unfortunately, you don't see that because the replay cuts out. Our final car of today was the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren. Now, this also went round the real-life Top Gear track, and I believe this was also insanely quick for a while. It also has side-mounted exhausts. How could I resist putting this car in? However, it didn't drive as well as I was expecting it to. To be fair, I wasn't really sure what to expect from the SLR McLaren. It looks heavy. Indeed, it was heavy. It actually weighs 3,860 pounds. So that's almost 2 tons, I believe. 617 horsepower, 575 pounds-feet of torque. So obviously, you know, it isn't a slouch. It doesn't feel slow, but it does really feel heavy. It has some oversteer. However, the primary problem with this car is the understeer. There's a lot of understeer in this car. It's, yeah, not particularly nice to drive. The brakes are also, again, they're like the Ford GTs. They're a bit spongy. They don't get it stopped particularly well. I was actually surprised with the SLR McLaren. I heard it had rave reviews in the reality, so not the greatest car in the world to drive, unfortunately. But then again, it isn't really built for hardcore track use. It's more supposed to be a GT cruiser, almost. Anyway, on to the lap times, and it's unsurprising. We have the Ferrari Enzo in front with a 1 minute 15.701. That's ridiculously quick. That's 5 seconds quicker than the SLR McLaren. That might be up there for a little while. We'll have to see what we bring to the play next week, but it's going to be a tough challenge to beat that car. Next up, we have the Mercedes-Benz SLR McLaren, a 120.590. A bit disappointed by the SLR, but it didn't drive as well as I thought it would. Ford GT is also around that ballpark, 120.746. So it's a bit slower than an SLR McLaren. Not particularly slow. I believe that might be slower than the time it's set round our old track. In fourth, we have the BMW Z8, 126.063, 6 seconds slower than the GT. Yeah, there's a bit of a strange time gap between these all. The Z8 was a pretty good car. I think if it had a bit better of an interior layout and the windscreen wasn't so dark, it could go a little bit faster than that. Skyline R34 in a very respectable fifth, 126.434. That's actually quite quick. I was expecting the Skyline to be a bit slower than that, but no. The Skyline was very quick indeed, actually. In sixth, we have the Renault Clio V6, 129.673. Yeah, the Clio doesn't handle quite as well as some of the other cars, but judging by the way that car drives, that's actually respectable for the Clio V6, because I was a bit worried if it would go slower than the Honda Civic Type R. And speaking of the Civic Type R, that goes into seventh with a 130.186. That's, I think that might be a bit faster than the Golf R went round on our first attempt around the track. And judging by the fact that that is a bit quicker than the Golf R, which went first round our track, yeah, that's a good sign. This series definitely needed a bit of a reboot to get the Golf R a time which is respectable for it. So we'll be throwing the Golf R around in the next coming weeks. I'll also be doing some more reviews of cars. I'm kind of looking to get more into that side of it, so this track actually has more of a purpose than just being a weekly thing we throw some cars around and I give my opinions on. But anyway, friends, that is about it for today. Again, if you want to recommend themes for the coming weeks, then please do down in the comment section below, and I will see you later. Farewell.